Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and we are continuing our spooky themed month with one story today, and that is of Ernie Rivers and the project Poltergeist. Kind of set it up a little bit last week, but basically, Project Poltergeist should kind of key you in. Like, this happened in the projects of a city. And we know who lives in the projects, not typically white people. And so one of the things that I think that makes this story stand out, among others, as we'll see later on, it's a black kid. And black people, like I said last week, they had a lot going on. They still do. And so when you get black people also actively concerned about the paranormal, kind of makes you think, all right? Because black people got a lot going on, all right? They got white people to worry about and all of the things that white people have done to them, and they just ain't got time, and I think, at least in my mind, I feel like a lot of the paranormal stuff is just white people problems, like ghosts and demons and cryptids. Like, that's all white people problems. Like, that's just all stuff white people have invented to feel some sort of adversity in their life, because you're going to be hard pressed to find it anywhere else. Anyway, that's the whole point of why this is probably, at least to me, a really interesting story, because it just doesn't happen to black people that often. And so let's jump into this story and see why it's so interesting.
Story time. Story time. Story time. Story time.
Ernie Rivers was born on May 6th, 1948 to Golden Gloves boxer Ernest Rivers Sr. and a sickly mother named Anne in Montclair, New Jersey. Now, because Ernie's mother was often sick, the family rarely had any extra money to live a decent life, which is great because, unless, Ernie Sr. was not great at being a boxer, probably wasn't making great money otherwise, right? But like, it didn't say he was a champion Golden Gloves boxer. It just said he's a Golden Gloves boxer. He's just in the Golden Gloves promotion, and who knows how often he's having to fight. And so if he's not a champion, probably not earning championship opportunities, not getting big payouts for his fights, and if his mom is always sick, can't also work, all of his money from his fights going to making sure that she's not, dying. And so they don't really have a lot going for them. In December of 1956, Ernie's mother fell ill again and begged Ernie Sr. to take her to the hospital. After a brief argument over money and how they couldn't afford another hospital trip, the dude just went to bed. And that's sad. This is just like, babe, I'm really sick. I feel terrible. Like, I need to go to the hospital. Babe, we can't afford to go to the hospital. Every time we go to the hospital, it's like a $30,000 bill. And I get it, even in the 1950s. That sounds ridiculous, but it's probably true. And so we're not going to the hospital. You can just die. And just, like, we think it's bad now. It's always been bad. It's always just the hospital and medical care has always been terrible. That night, Anne then had a dream that Ernie Sr. tried to kill her with the gun that he kept beneath the bed. When she woke up in the middle of the night, obviously just out of this nightmare, she grabbed the gun that was hidden under the bed and went back to sleep for another hour. And then at 5 a.m., she woke back up and asked Ernie Sr. if he was tired of her. When he didn't respond, probably because, I don't know, he's asleep, Anne shot him twice in the chest, killing him instantly. and initially claimed that Ernie Sr. had shot himself, but almost immediately buckled and confessed to what actually happened when police began asking questions. She was found guilty and sentenced to 22 years in prison, which then forced Ernie Jr., the one we're talking about, to live with his grandmother Mabel at the Felix Fold Housing Project in Newark, New Jersey. Shortly after his arrival, his grandfather died, and then his mother escaped from prison. And no one had any idea where she went, but like so much craziness going on in this kid's life. And I mean, he's only like 8 years old, maybe 9 at this point. So like his mom murders his dad, goes to prison, and then he goes to live with his grandparents. As soon as he gets there, his grandpa dies, and then he finds out his mom escapes from prison. So just all kinds of craziness going on. On May 6th, 1961, on his 13th birthday, his mom's still nowhere to be found, I'm guessing. Ernie was playing by himself in his bedroom when he heard a glass jar on top of a dresser in Mabel's room fall and crash to the floor. 2 days later, both Ernie and Mabel watched as 6 cups came off of their hooks on the wall, one by one, and fell to the floor. Later that evening, several bottles in the bathroom floor fell and shattered, one of which flew all the way into the living room, which was extra odd considering that the bathroom door was closed at the time that all of this happened. So, like, I don't know if the bathroom door opened or if the cup just allegedly just materialized straight through the door. But that's what they claimed happened. So shortly after this, Ernie and Mabel were then joined by their neighbor, Yetta Mandel. And as everyone was in the living room watching TV, a bottle of cologne from this same bathroom where everything else had been flying out of, this bottle of cologne flies into the room, quote unquote, turning a jig in the air, according to Yetta, and then shatters on the floor. Yetta then noticed a large glass decanter slowly moving towards the edge of the refrigerator on its own, which forced her to sprint into the kitchen and like move it back before it also fell off and shattered. As Mabel then told Yetta about everything that had been going on, a lamp in the living room just shattered without warning. At that point, everyone left the house as Ernie and Mabel went and tried to stay at a relative's house for the night. Unfortunately, no one could really accommodate them for very long, so Ernie and Mabel spent time in and out of their apartment, noting nearly 20 different incidents of things floating through the air around the house before falling to the floor and breaking. On May 11th, which would have been 5 days later, Newark news reporter Douglas Eldridge actually visited the apartment to ask about these strange occurrences. As everyone was talking about everything that had happened, a cup crashed to the floor in the pantry. This reporter, having seen that same cup in a spot where it was impossible for it to break on its own, immediately became a believer that something paranormal was taking place inside this apartment. Mabel then told him that was the 5th incident that had just occurred that day alone. A couple days later, or actually the next day, the story hit the papers and the project Poltergeist was born. Because poltergeists supposedly feed off the psychic energy of teenagers, because obviously that's the rules, reporters and skeptics quickly focused on Ernie as being the source of the trouble. Ernie, of course, insisted that he had nothing to do with it. But everyone's like, all right, this kid, he's obviously in a troubled home. He's probably just doing it for attention. We don't know how he's doing it. All right, it's pretty impressive how he's doing it. Gotta give him credit. But it's probably him. It's probably not anything paranormal. But then all of the paranormal people are like, well, I mean, it very well could be because he is troubled. And the spirits, they latch on to that troubled energy and manifest themselves in ways throughout the house. You get it. Irving Laskowitz, the tenant relations director of the Newark Housing Authority, put together a team to investigate whether Ernie was just being a dick or if there was like some kind of actual paranormal haunting going on in the project. They examined every square inch of Mabel's apartment and the surrounding units, but didn't find anything to indicate that a real person was causing all of the trouble. So like, and we've seen stories like this before where like, the kids or somebody would be like rigging up everything on strings or pulley systems or like figuring out how to like knock on doors or windows without people like seeing them in real time. But they tore this place apart and could not find any evidence of anything like that happening. Coupled with Mabel's 20 years of a clean record living in that project, the Newark Housing Authority had no choice but to acknowledge that something strange was going on that they could not figure out. Now, they didn't go as far as to say that it was officially haunted. They were just like, we don't know, but it's crazy. They eventually turned to Edward Del Russo, who offered to exorcise the entire building. Del Russo immediately identified the entity as a lost soul trying to communicate a message, and after a few rituals and chants, Del Russo burned a beeswax candle on the coffee table and declared that the problem had been solved. Except it wasn't, because maybe in the paranormal world, beeswax candles satisfy demons or something. I don't know. But obviously, just burning a beeswax candle and chanting isn't going to solve any kind of problem, real or imagined. More and more items, after Del Russo did his quote-unquote exorcism, more and more items kept floating through the air and shattering just as they had been doing the whole time. News of the paranormal activity eventually made its way to Dr. Charles D. Reg, a professor at Rutgers University, who then went over to Mabel's apartment as fast as he could to see what was going on. When he got there, Mabel told him about a 5-pound iron that had flown through the air earlier that day, and how a giant container of salt had launched itself across the apartment and smacked Ernie in the back. And that's interesting, because why would Ernie, if he's doing all of this, why would he try to hurt himself other than, I don't know, maybe trying to get attention off of himself? The bookcase had also fallen over multiple times, and the television had toppled over without anyone being home. As Dr. Reg investigated the house, more items as he walked around fell and shattered. Which, I mean, at this point, how many glass or porcelain or ceramic, just general breakable items do you have in your house? It's just, there's so many things in this house that are breaking. I don't know, maybe it's a different time in the 60s and everything was just breakable. I don't know. By now, Ernie was truly terrified and begged Dr. Reg to call Ernie's uncle to come and get him. When that uncle arrived, an ashtray flew up and grazed his chin before flying into Mabel's bedroom. A few moments later, a pepper shaker struck the uncle in the back. And at that point, people are just like, all right, we got to get out of here. And as the entire group, Ernie, Uncle, Mabel, Dr. Reg, whoever else is there, as they fled the house, the salt shaker and another ashtray flew at them. And that would have probably hurt. And at that point, Dr. Reg actually fully believed that the apartment was haunted, thinking that there's no way that Ernie or anybody could have just rigged all of these booby traps to have these things fly at my face while I'm here. And yeah, and assuming that all these people are telling the truth, that tracks. By September, the Project Poltergeist was widely known in the area and was a topic of discussion at the annual convention for the Parapsychological Association, which was taking place at the Henry Hudson Hotel in nearby Manhattan. On the last day of the event, Dr. William G. Roll from Duke University in North Carolina visited the apartment and spoke with Dr. Reg. Dr. Roll, who had pioneered the study of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, otherwise known as ghosts and stuff, performed several experiments to make sure that Ernie wasn't just playing a giant prank on everyone. Because again, all of the stuff points to Ernie causing all of this trouble. And so everyone is just grilling this kid, trying to just find anything they could to make it really, to make it clear that he was the one doing this. In one instance, Mabel reported that all of the money had been stolen from her wallet, and thinking that Ernie had done it, she went to him, but found that his pockets were empty and that the stolen money had actually just been spread all over the basement, except that it was $2 more than what she had been reporting missing. Ernie, allegedly, did not have $2 additional to his name at the time, so he couldn't have stolen it and then added more of his money to I don't know, whatever. But just as Dr. Roll felt as though he was starting to figure it out, Mabel grew tired of all of the investigations and ordered him to leave. Ernie and Mabel then continued to be tormented by the poltergeist as the television, refrigerator, washing machine, and kitchen cupboard all fell over and crashed to the floor. Eventually, the Newark Housing Authority and social workers actually removed Ernie from the apartment and sent him to a group home. When Dr. Roll found that learned that Ernie had been removed, he actually arranged for Ernie and Mabel to spend time with him at the parapsychology laboratory at Duke University. And we all know Duke University, right? like prestigious private school, all the smart kids get in there. But they had a parapsychology lab. Now, it still exists today. And it's not on the Duke University campus, but it is very close to it. And I don't know, it's called the Rhine Institute now, I think is what it is. Or no, it's the Rhine Research Center. And I don't know if it's, still funded by Duke or if it's independent now, but it became the Rhine Research Center in 1995. So at least as late as 1994, it was still part of Duke University. I don't know if it's still part of today, but they offer online courses and certificates in scientific parapsychology. They also hold public events to explore psychic abilities, experiences, techniques, and the culture of ESP throughout the world. Their mission statement is to explore the frontiers of consciousness and exceptional human experiences in the context of unusual and unexplained phenomena. The Rhine's mission is to advance the science of parapsychology, to provide education and resources for the public, and to foster a community for individuals with personal and professional interest in PSI. So you can just go to this place and go to their events and become a member and learn about people who think that they can talk to ghosts and spirits and stuff. There's a real place that is associated, or at least was, with a very high-end, private, prestigious university. I can't believe it, but it's true. So Dr. Roll gets Mabel and Ernie down to Durham to the Duke Parapsychology Lab. And as the group walked down the hallway past Dr. Roll's office, a book on his desk fell to the floor. And at that point, everyone believed that the poltergeist had followed them from New Jersey all the way down to North Carolina. After leaving the two at the Jack Tar Hotel, Dr. Roll then received word that things at the hotel were going crazy. He arrived to learn that a glass and an ashtray had already been shattered, because this is the time where everybody smoked. Everybody's got ashtrays, and they're just flying all willy-nilly throughout the place. A tube of toothpaste had floated into the bathtub. A lamp and a phone on the nightstand in their hotel room had both fallen over. The next day, Ernie was placed in the lab as a team of technicians performed experiments on him. Following a series of neurological tests, a team of psychologists began questioning Ernie, ultimately leading him to reveal that he was extremely angry about his childhood and distraught over the loss of his parents, which is extremely understandable. The team then placed Ernie in a room with a one-way mirror to observe him and his grandmother Mabel just kind of interacting, sitting together, waiting for what they thought might be the next test or whatever. When Mabel left the room for a moment, Ernie took 2 measuring tapes from the table and hid them in his shirt. And then when Mabel returned, Ernie yeeted those measuring tapes at the back of her head in plain sight of the psychologist observing him behind the mirror. At this point, the team then changed their entire philosophy and became convinced that Ernie and the Project Poltergeist and all of the paranormal activity around it was a fraud. But just to make sure, Dr. Roll conducted a polygraph test and asked Ernie about several specific instances that had been documented back in Newark. When Ernie claimed to not know how lamps had fallen or how pepper shakers had thumped people in the back, the polygraph confirmed that Ernie was telling the truth. And again, this is back when they thought polygraph tests were like legitimate scientific, instruments. So now they're more confused. And what makes this even better is that Dr. Roll then asked Ernie if he had thrown the measuring tapes at Mabel, and everyone had seen him do it. Like, multiple people saw this kid chuck those measuring tapes at his grandmother's head. But when Ernie denied doing it, and the polygraph showed that he was telling the truth, that people got like, all right, we don't know what's going on. Clearly, the polygraph knows all. And so if the polygraph says Ernie's telling the truth, even though we all saw him do it, whoa, what are we doing? So Dr. Ben Feather, Duke's resident hypnotist, was then called in to hypnotize Ernie and extract the real truth. Because when we're not dealing with real science, we're not going to use real science to figure out what the truth is. So now this kid's being hypnotized. And again, Ernie denied throwing the measuring tapes. So Dr. Feather, this doctor, maybe it's a PhD doctor, but still a doctor, a smart guy from Duke University, he then reasoned that instead of being a pathological liar, Ernie was just in a state of disassociation. The team then referenced the EEG report they had taken earlier and correlated Feather's theory to unexplained spikes on the chart. After more interviews, the Duke team then reasoned that Ernie's childhood trauma and distress had allowed a paranormal force to take control of Ernie and carry out the attacks, essentially knocking the real Ernie unconscious while things played out, leaving him with no memory of anything that happened. Because a child would never lie and keep lying to, because like this is where the story loses it for me. They are coming up with every possible reason for something paranormal to exist. They want it to be real so badly, and they are just going as far as they can to make it work. The team concluded that if things continued as they were, the quote-unquote real Ernie would be lost forever, and he would then be replaced with whatever paranormal entity that had possessed him, who just liked throwing and breaking things, I guess. However, given the current state of race relations in the country at the time, there wasn't like a real solution where anybody really wanted to help the family. You know, it's like, oh, this black family, oh man, this little poor black kid, he might be gone forever and be replaced by whatever paranormal entity possessed him. That sucks to suck, I guess. And the reason why I say that is because the Herman family from Long Island, New York, which I haven't told that story yet, but I'm sure we will. Their story was actually the inspiration for the movie Poltergeist. They got all kinds of support. And all kinds of people were like trying to help them figure it out. Whereas like once Duke was kind of like, hey, this is the thing, like no one cared. No one did not want to help this black family whatsoever. In the end, the team recommended that Ernie be permanently removed from Mabel's apartment so that the remaining items in her possession, which could not have been very much at this point, wouldn't get broken. So instead, Ernie was sent to live with his Uncle William and Aunt Ruth in Belleville, New Jersey. Although additional incidents occurred at this new home, the media frenzy around the story had kind of begun to fall off. In October of 1965, Ernie's mother, who had since been captured and put back in prison while all of this was going on, was released on parole and briefly reunited with Ernie. She was subsequently murdered by mobsters who wanted vengeance for Ernie Sr.'s murder. So this kid still can't catch a break. In 1967, race relations in Newark came to a boiling point, and a gun battle actually broke out at the Felix Fold Project, where Mabel and Ernie once lived, and a National Guard tank was actually called in to suppress the riot. I don't think Ernie was living there at the time. Mabel still may have been, though. The incidents and attacks around Ernie eventually disappeared, and he actually joined the Marine Corps when he turned 18. He eventually got married and had children, and the entire ordeal just kind of vanished into history without anyone truly understanding what actually happened.
All done.
All right, Ernie Rivers and the Project Poltergeist in the books. Let us recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, Ernie Rivers was a black kid. And so, listen, it's crazy when paranormal stuff happens to black people, but also apparently, as history suggests, no one cares. It really only matters if it happens to white people. And that is just the story of history, apparently. Number 2, kid had a rough childhood. Mom murders his dad. Mom goes to prison. Mom escapes. Mom eventually gets out on parole, but then is murdered by mobsters who wanted to avenge her husband's death. And then he lives with his grandparents. His grandpa dies almost immediately after he moves in. Just a lot of tragedy around this kid's life. And maybe that's why he was acting out. Or maybe it was a demon possessing him. Who knows? Number 3, Duke University, the prestigious one and only Duke University, got involved, did all kinds of tests on him. They thought, oh, maybe he was acting out, because they literally saw him hucking measuring tapes at his poor grandma when he didn't think anyone was looking. But then they hooked him up to a lie detector test, and the lie detector's like, yeah, this kid's telling the truth. He didn't do it. And so then they're like, whoa, we don't know. And so officially, no one really knows what was going on with Ernie, but maybe he was just being a dick, and rightfully so.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, we are wrapping up our spooky themed stories with the story of The Watcher. This was a real story that was adapted into a Netflix series in 2022. It sucked. The real story is pretty creepy. But then the people over at Netflix were like, hey, let's just make it real campy and dumb. And so they did. And so the series on Netflix, if you watched it, real stupid, not really true at all to the actual story. It followed it in concept, but then just everything else was dumb. So I'm going to tell you the real story of The Watcher next week. Come on back for that. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast